Welcome to logisticsales.com, where today we'll be discussing the art of listening. So stay tuned and let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of logisticsales.com, everyone, where today we're going to be touching on the art of listening. I'm your host, Dean, and with me, as always, are my co-hosts, Damon.
Hello.
And Gail.
Hi guys, happy to be here.
Again, in today's episode, we're going to be diving into one of the most critical yet overlooked skills in sales, and that's the art of listening. Effective listening not only builds trust, but it helps uncover opportunities and ultimately leads to better sales outcomes. And today, I'm really looking forward to jumping things off with Damon on the art of active listening and the impact it has.
Thanks, Dean. So active listening on the phone, a little bit different than being in person, but still you want to give your full attention because this is the opportunity to have that conversation with someone and really engage. And the more someone knows that you're actively listening to them, the more chances are that they're actually going to speak back. And for us, it's that opportunity to really connect deep down and get deeper with that customer to really be able to find out like those solutions for their pain points and really listen to what they're telling us. And I always believe that when we're listening to a client or a customer, they're always teaching us how to sell them. And so picking up on those little cues or a cue, and it's that way to get the customer to start talking is by listening to them. When someone feels like they're actively being listened to, they're more likely to say what's on their mind and start opening up because they know that the full attention is on them. And so active listening gives full attention to the speaker, and what we have to do as an active listener is to avoid any other distractions. And a lot of times when we're doing a sales pitch over the phone, one of the first things that we get distracted with is actually our own sales pitch. So that's where we want to be fully, and what I kind of tell our sales reps is just breathe, center yourself. Don't overly talk in a sales pitch where you stop listening to the client. And sometimes we're so focused on what we're saying and so nervous about what we're saying that if the client's totally taking us, to a different direction, all we're doing is coming back onto our pitch. It's a great way to lose that client for long term because it just leaves such a sour taste in that client's mouth when they just feel like they're not being listened to. And it's they're not there just to kind of listen to someone's sales pitch, but they're actually there to engage in a conversation and let it be two ways. And that's the whole thing that we have to remember is that when we're there to serve them, it's a two-way conversation, and active listening becomes so important in that aspect.
Yeah, I think it's really about how you create that dialogue, because if you're doing a sales pitch and somebody's just listening to you, it's not a dialogue, it's not a conversation. It's building up the points in that conversation so that you can have it two-sided. You can ask questions, you can get answers, they can ask questions, you can get answers. It's building that rapport and that relationship within the conversation, and you're going to do that by using active listening tools to pick up on like the subcontext between what is actually being said. And Damon mentioned it, that we tell our sales reps, like, don't get too focused on the pitch at the beginning because you lose what the customer is saying. And I can't stress that enough because we see it time and time again. Even when they're not talking for new sales reps, the customer or the prospect is talking to them on the line, but they're so focused on what they're going to say next that they're not listening to what the customer is saying. So really just take a moment. If they're talking to you, shut everything off in your brain and just absorb whatever they're telling you. Write it down, take notes if you need to, and then you're going to use that. Once you have that moment, take your thoughts, think about it, and then reply. But don't be thinking of your response while they're speaking to you.
Now, just circling back to the current segment that we're dealing with, it's mastering phone sales. And we've talked about establishing an effective pitch. We've talked about effective communication. And now we're talking about the art of listening. Remember, the pitch is to initiate and grab the attention of your listener and build their relationship. And the relationship comes through conversation. And if your pitch, you're about to deliver your pitch, but all of a sudden your prospect or your current client even takes the lead and starts communicating with you, you've already gone on to the next step and you're having actually a productive dialogue, and you're going to get a ton of information from that customer or prospect by listening. They're going to be giving you answers to questions you may even have if you're listening properly and asking the right questions.
One way I think for new reps, it's a really good technique is to use the landmark technique. So when you go into a conversation, have different landmarks of points you want to touch on in that conversation, but don't let them dictate how that conversation goes. They're just indicators when you kind of get to those flags in the conversation where you're like, that's a perfect point for me to mention this. So have your landmarks and know what your selling points are, and then just use them as they are properly fitting into that conversation. You want it to be organic. You want it to be natural.
And those landmarks, I know for myself, Gail, just to give the audience an example, is one is just get the right person on the phone, right? So landmark number one, find the right person. Landmark number two, give some sort of value proposition where they're interested in whatever you're trying to sell them, or again, we're qualifying them in that prospect. Thirdly is just getting an email. So I always try to close by getting an email and then following up with the last step or next step, for that next conversation. But for me, like, again, you just want to make your own landmarks and say, okay, well, what's important for me in this conversation? What am I trying to achieve? Am I trying to close the deal, or am I just trying to get to the next conversation?
And I think it's really important because it'll also help you dictate which ones are most important to say in those conversations, especially for those first few phone calls when sometimes they're quick and they want you off the line. They're not interested in a sales call right now. So by prioritizing those landmarks, you can get out the most important ones and leave the other ones for secondary conversations down the line.
For sure. And then just circling back to what Dean was saying, the conversation for listening usually starts right after the initial introduction. And this is usually where it is, because the first thing someone's going to ask you is, who are you? And especially in a cold call situation, it's, who are you? And even if you're doing a follow-up, sometimes they're not familiar with who you are because maybe there's been a time lapse or they're just busy and they just don't remember who you are. So first thing always is, be very clear on who you are. But then right away, it's about asking that open question, like you were saying, Gail, is ask a question to start getting them to start speaking. And usually, for myself, when it comes to like logistics or transportation, I'll be like, hey, yeah, this is Damon from, so-and-so trucking company. And what I'm trying to find out is if you guys are actually exporting your products across Canada or bringing them in from the United States. And then so I kind of have my qualifier question, and it's kind of open-ended to just see, okay, well, and I allow for that pause is what I do is I'll wait and I'll allow them and give them the opportunity to respond. And that's how a customer really knows that, hey, now I can start engaging and have the attention of this person because he's waiting for me to now make that response. And so I'm always putting out some sort of statement, which is going to evoke some sort of response, whether it's, again, talking about an industry trend or asking them a question about how a certain situation may be currently affecting them and allowing them to answer in that, in that context. And after we get the customer to give us some sort of response, what we want to do from our perspective is to get into agreement with that client. The more times that I can actually actively listen and repeat back to that client of what they're saying, now we're building more of that rapport, and it's just showing the client that I'm actively listening to them, and then I can engage to them based on what they're saying. I'm trying to give them some agreements and then coming back with some sort of positive point of how we can help them in whatever situation that they may be discussing, or I'm just agreeing with what they're saying and maybe adding my own knowledge to it to kind of expand and get them to expand on what they're talking about. By getting into agreements with that client is going to now let us build that rapport with them, where we can start offering solutions and again get, like we were saying about those landmarks, get to those next landmarks in our conversation to be able to start getting the action steps that we need to have happen in that relationship.
Thanks, Damon. And also, you want to keep a friendly tone and to really help keep that conversation going. From there, and it's really important to start asking questions that encourage dialogue. Don't you agree? Yeah.
I definitely do. When it comes to those conversations, the entire goal of the conversation is to dig out some information and to get the dialogue started so that you can answer some of those questions, qualify, and hopefully close. So when it comes to closing the sale, you're going to need to ask open-ended or two-pronged questions that are going to lead you again to a state of agreement and give you some answers so that you can continue to base your pitch and circumvent your sales strategy based off of what the customer is looking for and what's going to most resonate with their business. So one of the best ways that you can do that is by asking thoughtful and open-ended questions that are going to get you answers on what's going to be important to them in their business. So some examples of that are, can you tell me more about your current challenge with logistics? This is a good example because it helps identify pain points and areas in which they could be struggling. And then you can start looking at solutions that are going to fix those problems that they're currently experiencing. So by asking an open-ended question like that, you might get, a couple answers back like, oh, we keep getting late deliveries, or our pickups are never on time, or we keep having breakdowns all the time. And because of those answers, you can then structure how you're going to continue that sales and that approach. Other examples are, what are your biggest concerns when choosing a partner, like a carrier partner or a shipping partner? This is a good one for aligning offerings with their key decision-making criteria. So if you know that for key carriers, they're looking for somebody who has a good on-time delivery rating. They're looking for somebody with over 10 years experience in hauling produce. So you're going to have check boxes that are going to come up by asking these questions. And once you have those questions and the answers for them, you can start using that to build off of it and continue that relationship.
I think it's important, if you're asking those type of questions, always have a couple different solutions for whatever question you're asking. So if it's the one about the carriers, maybe you have a couple of stories that you could tell about, hey, typically this is what we see with a lot of clients is that when they're looking for a carrier, they're looking for A, B, and C. And sometimes they miss this because this is really important, and this is something that we have in our company that we always want to make sure that we kind of mention to our clients, right? But you may want to have some sort of responses based on what the person's saying, and have a couple different responses for every question that you may ask them, just in case of which way that conversation goes. And that's the thing about asking like smart questions. Don't just ask the question for the sake of asking a question, but have one where, again, you can show how skilled you are, your expertise, and the way you can do that is just being prepared for it. Ask somebody and just know in the back of your mind, like, if I'm going to ask a question, well, what am I trying to achieve here? Ask yourself that question, and then again, do I have anything intelligent to say to follow up if I ask a question?
Yeah.
What value can I give somebody?
Yeah, and I would say it's also very important to not be afraid to get very specific. You want to obviously make educated assumptions and guesses when you're having these conversations based off of the research you do. You never want to go into it just guessing blindly. But once you have more direct information, you're going to be able to get even more succinct answers that are going to give you an idea of how you could service them. A good example for that is if you're prospecting with a produce company, maybe you want to ask them, hey, are you sourcing all of your produce out of, the United States, Arizona, California area, or are you also sourcing directly from Mexico? Depending on how they answer that, that might lead into your segue of, oh, okay, are you moving your products from Mexico bonded through the US? And again, opening that up. So for someone like us who's a US and Canada bonded carrier, that's an opportunity for us. But we wouldn't have seen that if we hadn't dived in deeper to the questions and really started to dig into what they mean and reading the subcontext, not just what they say, but also what they're not saying.
And nowadays you can get so much information just off of any AI tool like ChatGPT or even some of the Google ones. But I mean, it's just saying, okay, well, how do produce companies bring in produce from, or which areas do people in Canada bring in produce from which areas around the world? And you'll have a whole bunch of information that'll just pop right in, and just looking at that information, analyzing it. And you can use the same information for multiple produce companies and then have a call list all based on produce companies in your area. And another one I like to use is when people have branch offices. I'll always make an assumption, and this is when we talk about making assumptions about what their business needs may be, is when they have branch offices. And I'll typically ask like, oh, hey, I noticed you're headquartered in maybe Los Angeles, California, but I noticed you have locations across the US and into Canada. By any chance, do you guys transfer from your facility in Los Angeles to the rest of your branches? And is that something that could possibly help you with? Or I'll just pick one branch in specific that I want to work with, because I'll narrow down on the one lane. And then, making that assumption, I'll try to find out how they answer that question. And based on how they answer that question, I'll have the other branches already, in my perspective. And, if they say, sorry, we don't ship to this one, then I'll start bringing up the other branches and, use that as a way to kind of keep that conversation going and say, well, okay, all right, it's not this location. Well, maybe, I noticed you guys have a couple locations here, here, and here. Is there anything that you guys happen to do in these areas? And is there someone else that maybe I could speak to that might handle that?
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to you want your pitch to leverage your skills as a service provider and also the alignment with that customer. And if you can leverage those and you can make your pitch very strong and show them that you have the resources to fit those needs, it gives you a real leg up for continuing that conversation and hopefully being able to do business.
So these type of questions help prospects open up. And once prospects start opening up, we get valuable information from them to kind of help us with our sales and follow-ups, right? We want to get as much information that when we, again, close with that customer or try to follow up with that customer, we have so much more information that we can do the next, 4, 5, 6, 7 follow-ups. And they always sound refreshing to that client. And especially when we repeat back their own words back to them, they like that because it's like, oh wow, this person was really listening, and you know what, they're addressing every single point that I made to them. And when you do it in such detail, it really impresses the customer for them to know that, hey, you know what, this is the type of person I want on my team because they know exactly what I'm looking for.
Exactly. Now, we've given you quite a few different tips and tricks on how to really effectively listen when you're having conversations, but there are quite a few mistakes that salespeople make, especially new people, but even the most experienced do have their slips as well. So Dean's going to talk about the power of silence.
Yes, the power of silence. Again, very important. And many sales reps feel the need to jump in and want to respond immediately while the prospect is speaking. But sometimes silence can be your best tool. And also it shows that you're listening. I don't know if you've ever been in a conversation with somebody and they're talking about something and it leads to your opportunity to speak, and rather than respond to what you're speaking about, they go right back to what they were talking about. It's that skill of being, interested more than interesting, and you're actually paying attention. And again, today we're talking about the art of listening. And part of that is remaining silent. It gives your prospect a moment to process their thoughts and often reveal a lot more information than you're intending on receiving in the first place. By allowing them to speak, and even by remaining silent, allowing them to think and process what they want to deliver, it opens the door to a wealth of information. So I'm going to talk about a couple strategies that are going to, you can leverage silence effectively. And one important skill is to pause before responding to show that you're absorbing their words. We have an example here about a prospect, just talking about, we're currently facing challenges with our supply chain. So instead of responding immediately, take a brief pause and consider their statement. And with all of these, I know 1 second can feel like a minute sometimes, but it really opens the door to a ton of information. So rather than blurting something out right away, show you're listening, you're absorbing what they've said, and you say, I understand. Could you share more about the specific issues you're encountering? And again, it shows you're valuing what they're talking about, you're listening, and you want to learn more. And it's developing that trust, the opportunity to open up in that dialogue to keep it going further. Another really good tool is to resist the urge to fill gaps. Let them talk. We've talked about that, about remaining silent. And sometimes they may pause, and right away, again, it's that awkward silence. A lot of people, when that silence occurs, they want to fill in the gaps. Wait it out. Again, it could feel like a minute. That's how sometimes that 1 second lasts. But by doing so, it's really going to allow them to almost feel the need to fill the gap themselves and offer that additional information. It's a really, really key strategy to use while you're doing that and dealing with them. And I think another one, which is very important, is to use strategic silence after asking the question. Again, it's encouraging the prospect to expand on their thoughts. It's kind of all one and the same when you think about it. You just want to be quiet and allow them to speak, especially after you're either asking a question or they're offering information, and sometimes they might not be finished. Just wait out for a second and they'll, keep going.
And that's usually the indicator is when someone is silent, that the other person knows that, hey, maybe it's okay, safe for me to talk right now. And sometimes you're not sure, right? If you're doing a cold call for sales and you're doing a pitch, maybe the person just thinks that they're supposed to listen to you, right? But that pause that you're doing is actually signaling to the other person that, hey, it's okay. This is a two-way conversation. It's not just me trying to say what I have to say, but you're important to me. I want to know what you want, and the only reason I'm calling you is so I can find out how I could better serve you.
And how better can you serve somebody by listening to what their needs are. If you're doing all the talking, you've lost the listener, because there's not that two-way dialogue, and without them speaking, you're not building the trust on the other side, which you want, and it's really important to do in effective sales.
At the end of the day, it's really about building that authenticity, because there's so many salespeople that are so focused on just delivering that pitch, getting their sales pitch out and to the prospect on the other end, that they almost aren't even registering what's being said back to them. So use those pauses, those breaks, those bits of silence as a tool and a resource. It's actually like a pro level sales technique that a lot of sales people can't achieve because they're so used to just the Shooter McGavin, as Dean likes to say, that mentality of doing sales. But silence in sales is such a powerful technique.
And it's a really fun skill to hone. If you want to practice with your friends, your partner, your colleagues at work, have a conversation with them. And as they're speaking, wait it out for a second and see if they offer more information, or ask a quick question and then just listen and watch what happens.
And just for context here, when you deal with sales calls, how often have you been on a call, even not a sales call, maybe it's a conversation with a friend, a coworker, a family member, and you're like, and then they try to say something, you're gonna do this with me here. We're gonna give everyone a live example. So, hey, how's it going? I just you see that awkwardness? It's hard to have a conversation like that. Mm-hmm. It's going to create breaks. It's going to create a dynamic that's not sustainable for continued conversation, for getting the answers that you need to be successful. You want to take out that awkwardness. And as awkward as being silent might feel, it actually is going to reduce that awkwardness and make the customer or the prospect more comfortable.
That was a great example, Gail. And people talk about that all the time. Like, you can over talk yourself out of a sale. And when you talk too much, try to wind it back a little bit. And that silence really comes in handy to kind of show that you're more relaxed in that conversation.
Exactly. And I think the more relaxed you are in those kind of conversations, the better that you're going to be able to handle them, especially when you start dealing with objections and rejection as well, because that's where the real struggle and pain point for salespeople comes in, is how do you overcome objection and rejection?
Great point, Gail. And so now let's discuss how to handle objections through listening.
Yeah, so when there's objections, it's making sure that we understand what the client is really saying, and really come back. What I like to do is come back with some sort of empathy, really sympathizing with what they're saying. Again, reiterate the point that they're making, and try to make it into a conversation where you really are trying your best to understand where they're coming from, understand the objection, try to feel that objection of what they're saying. So again, slowing down a little bit can help us understand and handle that objection a little bit better. And what we really want to show somebody is just, hey, well, your concerns are my concerns. I'm going to take care of those concerns that you do have. And if that's a concern for you, then it becomes a concern for me, and I'm going to find a solution that's going to work well for both of us. And, as a sales rep, that's my job, is just that customer service, is say, hey, how can I provide you with the best solution? And I have to take into consideration all those objections that you're telling me. And, my job as a sales rep is to give you answers for it. How am I going to make sure that you don't face any of those issues? And if you are, maybe, I'll tell you about my steps on how I can rectify any of those situations as they come up. And sometimes someone that listens to you having a game plan for their objections is another way for them to really understand, like, yeah, you know what, I'm working with the right client. If ABC happens, then they have, E, F, G solutions, right? So there's something that if someone's always coming back with some sort of, empathy and understanding, and, again, those the right answers that people want to hear, then, and it's not just what they want to hear. Sorry, I shouldn't be saying that, but it's with the right answers that that you can deliver on, right?
And you say you shouldn't say it's what they want to hear, but truthfully, when they're on the other end and they're dealing with a crisis, there are certain situations or solutions that they do want to hear. And I think the really important fact about that is it's showing you care. And at the end of the day, they if they're picking somebody that they want to work with, they do want to work with a sales rep that cares about their business, cares about their problems, and does have the information and the answers that they want to hear.
But I think the distinction is that follow through. If you are going to tell someone something that they want to hear, make sure you have the follow through to be able to achieve it and deliver on that.
Good point.
Yeah. And the other thing about offering empathy when it comes to objections, what we're really trying to find out is it really a true objection? And sometimes what people will say is like, we're not looking for somebody right now. Well, what does that really mean? Are you looking for somebody tomorrow? Are you looking for somebody a week from now? Are you waiting for something bad to happen for you to then find a solution to whatever, potential situation that we're talking about? But, at some point, there may be a need for that service or product that you may be offering, and trying to find out the right timing for that is important. And objections kind of just lead us to ask for more clarifying questions, especially when we're in the qualifying process for that customer and really trying to find out if we're a good fit. And sometimes you'll find out that the person that's able to handle the objection and have a response for it, instead of being like, oh, hey, sorry, they're not interested, and maybe I'll just move on to the next one. But the person that's able to sit there in front of that client and really have that conversation with them, the client knows, okay, well, hey, you know what? I respect somebody for trying. I respect somebody for changing, the way that these conversations happen. Because sometimes people just maybe having a bad day and they just don't want to talk to somebody because they're grouping you with the 50 other salespeople that try to reach them before you did. And, maybe there's another bad experience that they're feeling again when they're having that conversation with you. And for us, it's differentiating ourselves always as a sales rep and say, hey, you know what, hold on, I did my homework. I'm coming prepared. I'm going to have some answers for you. I know that you're a very important person, so I'm going to make sure I do the best part that I can do to make sure that I give you the proper solutions. And that's, again, is how I show up to that conversation. And again, research is what we always say. Come prepared to any conversation. And don't be scared of objections. That's just part of the process. And the more that we get comfortable with objection and stay relaxed in that situation, the customer knows, again, I'm dealing with the right person.
Yeah. And to come prepared, especially be prepared, because a lot of opportunities come when there's a problem that's currently ahead. So you may just call at the right time and you're offering a solution of a problem they're currently experiencing. So don't be surprised if they're going to call you on it. So you got to make sure that you can back up, like Gail was saying, what you're saying you're capable of doing.
Yeah. And those objections are the things that lead to the solutions. Like, how else are we going to offer solutions to somebody if there's no objections, right? Those objections are pain points, and they may lead to other pain points that they may not even have thought about was even a pain point for them until we, expand on that conversation. And so reinstating their objections is just showing them like, hey, yeah, we're listening. Right? You may not be looking for somebody right now, but hey, maybe when your season comes up, or maybe, the same time next year when, something happens again, or, hey, maybe we're just a good backup, for what, may come in the future. But there's so many ways that we can kind of lead into setting ourselves and planting that seed. Because again, a lot of times people aren't ready to buy right away. And if we know that as a sales rep, like, there's only a small percentage of people that are ready to buy right now. Right? But the thing is we want to set it up where, that next purchasing decision is with us. And that's what I want to always set up as a sales rep and say, let's have that next conversation. But let me just show you that I understand where you're coming from, and empathy goes a long way for that.
Awesome. Thanks, Damon. So now we're going to wrap things up with Gail, and we're going to cover some of the best practices for improving your listening skills over time.
Thanks, Dean. Now, when it comes to active listening, I really do believe that it is an art form. It's something that we have to practice and continuously try to do in order to become proficient at it. But it's going to be a really great tool in your toolbox for being a salesperson. So we do have a couple things that you can try and practice to improve that skill and to become a active listener and to really perfect that art. So the first one that you can do is review sales calls and assess how you were listening. So the easiest way, and we do this with our sales reps, is just to get them to record it. Maybe it's your first 5 calls, maybe it's your first 500 calls. But by recording them and then listening to them back after the fact, you'll actually pick up on a lot of insights on how you did as a salesperson while listening in that call. It's actually quite eye-opening. Sometimes you're in that conversation, you're so engrossed in it that you don't even realize that you missed half of what was said. And when you listen back to it, it actually will start to pick up these flags in your brain and say, oh, how did I miss that? I didn't even hear her say that. He said this and I didn't even catch it. So by re-listening to it, it's going to train your brain, train your mind to pick up those cues, to pick up those flags while you're doing them live, so that in the future, you'll be able to do it on the spot and not have to go back and reflect on your recordings.
I think it's thinking about the qualities that you want to have when you're listening back to that conversation, and really saying and asking yourself, like, what type of person do I want to be when I'm listening to somebody? Do I want to be empathetic? Do I want to be that problem solver? Do I want to make somebody laugh, right, in a situation? But there's so many qualities that we can just choose randomly and just say, hey, what type of qualities can I try to exhibit when I'm having that conversation with somebody and I'm actively listening? How do I want the conversations in my future to be? And just knowing that, by changing your pitch and by changing your different styles, we're learning from each and every conversation of how we could improve and have better conversations the next time around.
Yeah. And they do say practice makes perfect for a reason. So, the next tip that you can use is to practice summarizing those conversations to reinforce your understanding of what was said. Now, there are many ways that you can do this. It could be even just practicing with a friend. Maybe say, hey, Dean, I want to have a 5-minute conversation with you. I want you to tell me something random about your life. And at the end, I'm going to repeat back what you told me and tell me if I'm in the ballpark. It can be as simple as that between you and a friend, a family member, etc. But you can also do it with those recordings. If you're recording those calls, I would challenge you to take a minute after the live call is done, and write down your summary. How did that conversation go? What were the key points of that conversation? Then go listen back to the recording and try it again and see how much you missed in that. And I think that'll be a really good exercise for seeing the difference between what your brain can live remember versus when you go back to it and are starting to look at it again. What are the things that you missed?
And a good way another practice tip for summarizing is just being thankful for someone to take the time to speak to you. Start with that, and then again reiterate some of the points that were in that conversation and say, hey, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I will definitely get back to you with 1, 2, 3 items, whatever was happening in the conversation. But or if it's just an introduction, I'd love to send you the information that I spoke to you on over the phone about, and just have that information ready for them.
Exactly. And then the final one is just focusing on the prospect's tones and their emotions, not just their words, because realistically, communication is only a small portion of what we actually voice. A lot of it is body language, it's eye contact, it's the tonality, it's the pace in which we speak. Now, you're not going to be able to see all of that when it comes to phone sales, of course, because you don't have that face-to-face interaction, but you still will be able to pick on subtle emotional cues and verbal cues and physical cues on how they are interpreting that conversation. How do they feel in it? And if they're showing you signs of uncomfortableness or confusion, how do you alleviate that? So by being mindful to their emotions and how you register them, you'll be able to adjust those conversations moving forward.
Yeah, super important. And again, by continuously refining your listening skills, you're going to become a more effective salesperson. You're going to close more deals and build long-lasting, trusting relationships. So, before I close out, Damon, any final remarks?
Keep listening.
Yeah. Gail, you good?
Just one more. If you guys thought you got out of some work today, you did not. We do have a worksheet for you. Do really highly suggest everybody go and take a look at it. Active listening is something that you do have to put into practice to become good at it. So do the worksheet, do some of the work, and then go practice it with your own sales and in your day-to-day lives.
Awesome.
And just a reminder, maybe if you have questions, reach out to us. We want to help as many people as possible. We're doing this for you, and we want to make sure that if you have questions, leave us some comments, reach out to us, and again, we want to see your success in sales always.
Absolutely. We are here for you every step of the way. And touching on our topic today, the art of listening, remember, to master phone sales, you need to be able to actively listen. You want to ask great questions. You want to use silence strategically. So stop, wait out that awkward second, which may feel like a minute, and handle objections with empathy. And this will continuously help you refine your listening skills. So thanks again for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the show, and stick around for our next episode. We'll be covering another essential phone sales strategy. Until then, keep listening and keep closing. Take care. Bye.
Bye, guys.